Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the Gentle Art of Crushing It show, where we focus on learning and sharing with our listeners all there is to know about how to create success in our lives. This show stands on the shoulders of giants. Our mission is to empower and inspire our listeners to create the life of their dreams whilst having a blast in the process. Let's celebrate life together. Welcome to the show.
Welcome back to the Gentle Art of Crushing It podcast. My name's Randy Smith, and I'll be your host today. And I'm really excited to have Chris Larsen with us today. Chris is the founder of Next Level Income. He is a real estate investment coach. He's a podcast host of the Next Level Income show, and he has a background in medical device sales. So he's a sales guy, and I love sales guys. So Chris, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you here.
Randy, always good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Chris, let's jump right in. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself and how you came to be the founder of Next Level Income?
Yeah, absolutely, Randy. And, I'm glad you said that I have a background in medical device sales, because a lot of people ask me, they're like, oh, when did you make this transition into real estate? And, you know a little bit about my story. We've been friends for a little while now, but it's confusing to people because a lot of people don't know I bought my first property at 21. And I was in college. I went to Virginia Tech. I studied biomechanical engineering, which kind of indirectly got me into the medical device space. But my goal at the time was to be a professional cyclist. And I went to Virginia Tech. I really wanted to go out to Boulder and do that, but Virginia Tech I got in-state tuition, and they had a great place to race bikes. And I put my head down, and I was working through my engineering degree, but I was spending as much or more time in classes riding my bike. Yeah. And everything was going well. After my freshman year, I was having a really good year racing. But this anniversary just passed here not too long ago, but June 21st, 1997, my best friend, my training partner, my roommate died. He had a massive brain hemorrhage. And I continued to race for another year. I went back to school, but I wasn't happy. I was probably depressed. But cycling was really my therapy. I did not want to be in school, though. I did not want to be an engineer. I kind of figured that much out. And after the next summer racing, I was very successful. Actually, my team went pro, and I was, at that same level. But I walked away. And the reason is I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. And I kind of had this realization, Randy, that life was more than just riding a bike around in circles. And, it's a really privileged thing that we have, especially in America, that we get to work out for health. A lot of people around the world, first off, if you're making 35 or 40 grand a year, you're in the top 1% of income in the world. Yeah. And to have the free time in addition to that type of wealth to go and recreationally race or do a sport is, I think we should acknowledge just how special that is to be able to do that. But, I kind of realized, one, I wasn't going to be a great pro. There was a lot of drugs in the sport at the time. I mean, let's be honest, there's a lot of drugs in a lot of sports.
Sure.
But cycling just got a lot of bad press, and cyclists are tested morning, noon, night, 24/7, around the clock, blood, urine, hair, whatever you want. It's pretty impressive, what they do. But I had friends coming back from Europe telling me about that and, what was going on over there. And I was like, I don't want to be like a crappy pro that's on drugs. Like that's kind of like the worst of both worlds. And that, along with, wanting to honor the life that I was giving, and my friends like Chris that didn't have his life anymore, I said, you know what? I don't want to have any regrets. I want to live life to the fullest. And the thing that also hit me, Randy, was that you need money to be able to do that. You really need financial freedom to be able to live life on your own terms. So I set off on this quest driven by all those factors to become financially independent. And I was only 20 years old at the time. I started day trading in the stock market as a junior in college. I was making $5,000 a month day trading in the stock market, but super stressful. There were a lot of nights I didn't sleep. I'd be laying there at 3 a.m., just like, thoughts running through my head. And sure. I just remember thinking, like, in another 20 years, do I want to be doing this at 40? Like, this isn't investing. This isn't freedom. This isn't fun. So I read 250 books on money, stocks, real estate, business. Actually got an MBA, almost got a PhD in finance as well.
Wow.
And during that time, I said, real estate is going to be my path towards financial freedom. And I bought that first property at 21. And if, I kind of highlighted a lot of the pieces of my story. And if you really want to dive in, you can get a free copy of my book at nextlevelincome.com. And I talk, even more in detail about that journey as well.
Are you interested in real estate investing but don't know where to get started or think you don't have the time or money? Are you stuck in your W-2 because the golden handcuffs make it hard to walk away? If this sounds like you, check out impactequity.net and schedule some time to talk with the founder, Randy Smith. Randy went from massive income to leaving his W-2 through passive income, and he can help you do the same. www.impactequity.net.
I love it. I love it. So this is not your traditional go off to school, get a good job, and then decide that you want to become a real estate investor. It's much, much more than that, much deeper than that.
Yeah.
And I would imagine the discipline that you gained through your sports years, that's translated really into everything that you've done. Do you see the correlation there and how it's impacted your ability to be a successful real estate investor as well? Or?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'll kind of share, why I did get into med device as well. But yes, I when I was running teams, when I was hiring sales teams, I absolutely love to hire athletes. And those same reasons are, I think, what helped me be successful. So one, if you're an athlete, you have to learn a lot of things that we don't really do or really appreciate as much in today's world, like delayed gratification, right? You have to, as a cyclist, I would plan for like the national championships, 9-12 months out, and you have to kind of periodize. So you do your winter training, you do your spring training, you do your in-season training. You have different cycles that you go through to kind of peak and really get ready. People would ask me, they're like, "Oh, Chris, like, how do you, weight is so important in cycling. Like, how do you lose weight?" And I had a very simple answer: don't eat. And people
Sure.
are like, ha ha ha. It's like, no, it's as simple as that. It really comes down to discipline. And I never had the most talent, Randy. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm not the most talented when it comes to cycling. All those things, but I'm very disciplined. And when I had a friend, I trained with a lot after my friend Chris passed away. And he goes, yeah, like, Chris, you just somehow you're always on race day. I'd have off days training in this, but I just had the ability to train for long periods of time in a very focused manner, and then ultimately get my mind around a point of focus for a specific event. And, all of those things, the discipline, the time management did help me. The other thing, Randy, is I felt like I always had a couple jobs because I was in school. So in high school, I took full AP course load. I came into college with, I think I had 28 credits my freshman year. So I was taking a lot of, high level courses. I was president of the National Honor Society. So I was doing extracurricular stuff, and I was training 15 to 25 hours a week on my bike, in addition to traveling on the weekends and racing. So I was just always doing stuff, and you have to be very disciplined with your time. So that's another thing. I became very efficient with being able to kind of parse my time out. And then the last piece, Randy, is I think, when you're an elite athlete, you have to have a certain ability to kind of compartmentalize and push and manage stress. And I think that's another component when you have, the ability, you're like, hey, I just got to make it happen. A bike race usually comes down to, one or a couple small moments in the race where you have to mentally choose to go deeper, harder than you feel comfortable doing, and risk like losing it all to win. It doesn't always come down to a sprint, but sometimes you just have to make that choice and kind of have this, instinct and feel. And I think, that's like being an investor. You never can be 100% sure if it's the right time to invest, pull the trigger, do a deal. Yeah. But when you do it, you have to commit 100% and go full force into that.
Yeah, I heard somebody recently say, opportunity looks a lot like risk early on. And when it stops looking risky, usually the opportunity is gone. So that, I like that mindset and how you relate that to racing as well. Like those two moments where you've got to make the hard decisions and it's going to go one way or the other. And hopefully when you roll the dice, it's going the right direction. So, so I'm curious, you were an elite athlete. You went down this path of stock trading while you were in college, and then you end up landing in medical device sales, which folks that are in sales know that is the space to be. Very, very high stress, I've heard, tons of hours, but the income potential is fantastic. So how did you land in medical device sales? Was it just kind of a natural progression of what you were doing, or was there a story behind that, which I suspect there is?
Yeah. Well, life kind of unfolds and you look back and you're like, oh, it happened just the way it was supposed to happen. That's kind of what I believe.
Sure.
Even though sometimes, it's not comfortable. But so I decided I'm going to be an investor. I'm going to achieve financial independence at a young age. And when you're 21 and you're in college, and I bought my first property, bought my second property, you run out of money pretty quick and you run out of credit pretty quick. So, I came to this realization that I need to go make money. And I read Rich Dad Poor Dad around that same time. So this would have been around 2000. It had just come out. I was in a bookstore in Charlottesville, Virginia, in a Barnes and Noble. And I was in the finance section, as I seemed to find myself very frequently because I was ripping through so many books. And this gentleman looked at me and he goes, "Are you looking for a book to read?" And I said, "Yes." And he held up Rich Dad Poor Dad, and actually got a copy that Robert himself gave me a few years back. And he said, "You should read this." And he handed me Rich Dad Poor Dad. I read it, really resonated with me. Robert Kiyosaki's a sales guy too, real estate guy. And I was like, this is like my people right here. And one of the things that Robert Kiyosaki said in the original Rich Dad Poor Dad was, you need to be accredited to have access to the best deals that are out there. So then I said, okay, I said, "Randy, what can I do that is going to allow me to make $200,000-$300,000 a year?" So I started looking at different options. I was always in sales from a young age. I sold wrapping paper at age 12. I had a paper route 13, 14, 15. So that's a sales role as well.
Sure.
So that kind of seemed appropriate to me. And I was working for State Farm. So I was finishing my MBA. I was working for Virginia Tech. So I got my MBA paid for, and I was actually getting paid on top of that. I was selling, I got licensed as a life insurance agent. I was selling life insurance in the evenings and weekends. And I was a licensed realtor as well, all at the same time.
Sure.
Because I quit racing my bike. So I had all this free time and energy, right? So my agent that I worked for one day says to me, he goes, "You need to meet my friend Alan. You guys will hit it off." And he's always doing stuff. And he's like in the OR. He goes, "I think you'll really, get a kick out of listening to what he does." Turns out he sells hips, knees, shoulders, trauma equipment for Johnson & Johnson. So I take him out to lunch. He tells me what he does. He tells me how much he made. At the time, he was making $350,000 a year. This is 20 some years ago. And I said, how can I do that? So I set off on a quest to enter that space, which took me a few years. And it was, it's a blast. You get to go into surgeries, but it is high stress. It's a lot of hours. I spent 12 years of my life on call. I missed, a lot of different events, but I had that plan for financial independence. So when I would make $1, I would save 50 cents of each dollar that I made, and that would get plowed into income producing real estate. And, by the time my wife and I were in our early 30s, mid 30s, somewhere in there, we were financially independent. So I didn't have to do that anymore. And that gave us a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different things, and ultimately start syndicating our own deals, some of the same types of deals that we were investing in, 15 years ago.
I love it. So the discipline that you learned from being an elite athlete carries over into this new role, which carries over into your financial independence path as well. You don't hear a lot of people saving 50% of their income, even as top producing salespeople. I was always amazed where, we were getting 6-figure quarterly bonus checks, and I had friends, you'd come together on bonus day and say, "Hey, what are you doing with your bonuses?" And half the people were paying off credit card bills, which was baffling to me with the type of money that we were making, that they were still using credit cards. So kudos to you for learning that lesson early on and investing in real estate. So now you bought some single families. Did you stay in the single family space throughout your medical sales career, or did you branch out into other asset classes?
Yeah. Well, let me give listeners a little hack here. So, I mentioned my discipline, but my wife jokes because she's like, I can't bring ice cream into the house because you have no discipline. And
Okay.
I said, well, my wife's name is Jessica. I'm like, well, Jess, I have the discipline not to buy the ice cream and bring it into the house. So I think, you have to be aware. We have to be aware of our tendencies as humans and also our personal tendencies, right? Like some people can't sit down at a bar and have just one drink. I have a really hard time entering a race and just quote unquote having fun. Like I'm a very competitive person. So, I don't really race anymore because it kind of overtakes, everything that I do. So, I have to kind of understand that. The other thing is, if there's money in the bank, we're probably going to spend it. So how can you earn money and then get it out? And I talk about the savings tax in my book. And I talk about this in chapter 3. So what we did was we actually set up cash value life insurance plans that pulled money out of our account each month, and it went into our life insurance policies. And it was earning a return in those life insurance policies. And that built up cash that we were able to use. And the neat thing was, Randy, I could put our bonus, like I would, if I earned $100,000 as a bonus, for instance, I could put $50,000 into that policy. And then what I would do, I would say, okay, if I have a $100,000 bonus, I'll save $50,000 and then I'll spend $50,000 just freely.
Yep.
So my thing was, okay, if I save that money first, whatever's left, spend it freely, have fun.
Yep.
So it's kind of like, when your parents said, hey, eat your vegetables first, then have dessert, you kind of get that reward afterwards. So if you can figure out a way to kind of, hack that process for yourself, and, Profit First talks about this as a business owner, it's the same principle. Pay yourself first, invest, and then figure out how to pay the bills after that. And, you tend to learn a lot of discipline. So what happened was, people would like make fun of me for where we lived, because we lived in this little 1,500 square foot house and kind of a up and coming part of Asheville. And, they're like, oh, you must not be making any money. Well, we lived very comfortably. We had nice cars. We had a nice home, but we were living well within our means. And then, as our passive income grew, then what happened was, we basically allowed our lives to kind of change and kind of manifested, this higher level. And then people were like, what happened? They were really curious.
Right.
Like, what have you been doing all this time? Right. But if you're making $500,000 a year and you're saving, after tax, $100,000, $200,000 a year for 10, 15 plus years, that's a lot of money.
Absolutely.
That's a lot of money. So, that's kind of step one. Step two is like, what did we actually invest in? At first, it was just single family. Excuse me one second. It was just single family. And I had a real simple plan, Randy. I said, all right, own enough single family properties to, before debt service, have $10,000 a month coming in. And then all you had to do is pay off the debt. You got $10,000 a month coming in, right? Yeah. That was the first plan. But after my mother passed away in the end of 2011, my wife and I kind of did an inventory. Our boys were both born. She was working. It was costing us money for her to work and pay taxes and have the boys in daycare. So we started building spec homes, and I started reevaluating our investment portfolio. And what we did was we started moving from single family properties and the equity we had in those to multifamily properties. And what happened was it took me less time to manage. I made more money after tax, better after tax returns. And I found a strategy that was very scalable, and ultimately after investing in those for several years, we did a JV partnership with the syndicator, with the sponsor, the operator, that we did those first few deals with, and did our first deal, my first partner and I, in 2016.
Fantastic. Okay. So 2016, are you still doing medical device sales at that point, or are you full-time now in real estate?
Yeah, so that's what's kind of wild, and I think a lot of people, they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna retire when I'm 40 or 50, or when I get enough passive income." What I've found is your mindset kind of shifts because when you don't have to work anymore, I find that you're actually more effective because you can do what you love, and you can really be true to your principles, and I think that's really important in life in general. And what happened was that year, I actually got we managed the biggest account that I managed at the time. We ultimately, when I started off, we had about 35% of the business in that account when I moved to Asheville. In 2016, we went from 35% in 2008 to 8 years later, negotiating a sole vendor agreement. So basically, we got all of the business, and we were able to do that because I say I could bet big because I didn't need to work anymore. So I was able to do all the right things and play, big league ball, not play small ball, where a lot of the other reps were so concerned about losing their business and their primary source of income that they didn't play to win at a higher level. So what happened was I said, "Hey, I'm going to walk away from this role." And in that ensuing kind of year, 18-month process of having that plan, we actually, my business grew more than it ever had before. And then I was recruited into a leadership role in another company. So ultimately that morphed into being able to manage an independent distributorship for one of the top 3 medical device companies in the spine space. I was working for Medtronic at the time, which was number 1, went to work for the number 3 player. And I was able to do both. And I was able to do both because I wasn't on call. I did cover some call from time to time for my reps, but I was in a leadership role. So because I could manage my time, Randy, now I was working about 16 hours a day, about 6 days a week, doing both. But I would leave, I'd be gone for 2-3 days, and I would work the entire time I was gone. I would get up at 5, I would work in the evenings, I would make phone calls in the car to investors, I would look at deals, I wrote my book early in the morning hours.
Sure.
So I did keep doing that. I told myself, we built a new home, which is where I'm sitting right now. My wife's an architect. It was one of our dreams. And we said, okay, it'd be easier. If anybody knows about real estate and the income you make, you don't make a lot of money on paper, which is great for taxes, but it's really bad if you're trying to get a conventional loan to build a house. I can tell you that.
Sure.
Yeah. So it made it a lot easier to get a loan by keeping that job. And I told my wife 2 things. I said, 1, I'm going to keep doing this until we're done the home and until it's not fun anymore. And kind of both of those things ended up happening at the same time in 2020 as COVID was kind of you could say starting off or ending up depending on how you look at things. But I ultimately, my son looked at me on a ski trip that winter and said, "Dad, I had so much fun. I wish we could do more of this." And 2 days later, I had my review with my VP to kind of go over the plan for the year. And I kind of scratched it all out. And I said, I'm not going back. And I told him, I think it was either, it was a Tuesday. I forget I think it was the 3rd of January. And I laid out everything for him. And he goes, "Chris, this is great. Like, great plan." He's like, "I just have one question. Like, where do you fit into this?" And I said, "I don't." And we managed a transition. The company was very gracious. Worked out very nicely. But yeah, I was able to do both. It took a lot of time. But I got to kind of check the leadership box off on my career path. And it also made me realize that, the title I had on my card really didn't mean anything to my boys that are now 12 and 14. And, being a VP or president of a medical device company was not as important as being able to spend the time with my boys that I didn't get to spend with my father because he passed away when I was 5. So that really has meant a lot to me here over the past several years.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think there's just a ton of lessons in that. I feel like we could do a whole other podcast about mindset, discipline, those types of things. I do want to jump into the business today, though. Yeah. So we definitely, let's schedule that. But I certainly want to let the audience hear, our listeners hear what it is you're doing today. You've moved from multifamily and you're now focused on another asset class. So let's talk about that a little bit. What what caused that shift, and what is it exactly that you're doing now, and why?
So Randy, I think it's really important. I kind of build frameworks as I go through life. So I build frameworks around things that I do, and ever since I was young, this is kind of how my brain works for whatever reason. But I got into med device, one, because it was interesting, but as I looked into it, the demographics really supported the medical device field. And this is because the baby boomers were aging. They were the most active, most affluent generation, that we've seen in America. And they wanted to stay active, which means they're going to have surgery, and they had money to have surgery. So that was really good to be in the medical device space, very steady. So that's some advice. If you're out there and you're looking for a career, especially if you're young or you have children or grandchildren, I would advise them to find a trend that they can follow for about 20 years and really have some predictable income, because that's going to help support your investing. So those same demographics rolled over into the multifamily space. When I learned about multifamily, the millennials, biggest renter generation in history, really supported multifamily. And I made this decision about, were we in 2024, 12 or so years ago. I kind of saw these patterns evolving. I said, all right, this is going to be a great space to be in for the next 10 years. I think that, going forward, I think senior housing is going to be a big one as the baby boomers start to turn 80. We're kind of like right on the cusp of that. But what are we facing now? And I'll talk a little bit about one of my favorite books and kind of how the real estate cycle works. But where we are today, real estate prices are high, interest rates are high. I'm just down touring a deal in Houston last week, and the cost to own a home is about twice what it costs to rent down there, because the prices are so expensive and rates are so high. So it puts a lot of pressure on renters, right? So we have a real affordability issue in this country right now, and a lot of the same demographics and those same issues really are mirrored in mobile home parks. But mobile home parks are unique in a few different ways. One of them is that mobile home parks are disappearing across this country today. There are less and less mobile home parks. And the reason is simple. It's called NIMBY, not in my backyard. And a lot of people have this impression of mobile home parks, maybe people cooking meth or, crime and these sorts of things. But I can tell you, owning some of these, lower quality apartments, that's way worse to deal with than somebody that owns their own mobile home and is renting a lot in a park. There's a higher level of pride of ownership that we see. Also, one of the other things that's benefiting mobile home parks is that nothing is more affordable than living in a mobile home.
Sure.
It's cheaper than renting, and it's not typically subsidized. So if you're an investor and you own a mobile home park, you're not relying on the government or a third party to pay your bills. Now, that could be a good thing or a bad thing sometimes, right? And there are sometimes subsidies in those things. But I really like the fact that you have that pride of ownership. The other thing is, if you're trying to move the needle, so if rents are, say, $1,500 and you're doing a value add deal in multifamily, and you go in and you invest $5,000 or $10,000 a door to raise rents $100 or $200, that's a good deal, right? Well, what if I told you we just refinanced a mobile home park where rents were about $300 and now they're over $450 a month in 2 years? So, and that took very little capital expenditure. So, when prices are high, the amount it takes to move the needle gets higher and higher. And as rents get higher and higher, you have greater pressure on the ability for most renters to pay that. So you can't raise rents like we did 5 or 10 years ago with the same amount of investment. Either it takes more investment or you can't raise rents as high. Whereas in mobile home parks, you can move that needle proportionally more. Now, the challenge is, where do you find these mobile home parks? A lot of times they're owned by mom and pops. We're in the process of buying 3 small parks right now that are all in the 30 to 40 lot space. These aren't big parks. They're all owned by, what I would call mom and pops. The proportion is about 85% mom and pops, whereas in the multifamily space, it's inverse, right? You're dealing with people in suits and ties. It's more of an institutional place. It's way different to manage and operate these types of parks. But you can also employ, so just to kind of pause there. One, we have, trends that are very supportive of the mobile home park space in terms of development or lack thereof. Two, the affordability issue is very beneficial in terms of mobile home parks and the ability to continue to achieve those returns. And then number three, you can do what's called like a roll-up strategy in the business world, whereas you might buy a mobile home park at an 8 cap and you roll it into a portfolio. So for instance, we have 6 parks outside of Columbia, South Carolina. We're set to buy a 7th. Plugging that 7th park into our portfolio of 6 is much more accretive, is much more valuable, because now we increase our portfolio to a level that is an institutional size portfolio in that market. And instead of selling it for an 8 cap, we can sell it for, say, a 7 or a 6 cap. And some people are like, well, how do you know that? Well, we just refinanced a park in that size. And, we know within a pretty tight range of what we can do. And even in this interest rate environment, Randy, we were able to refinance that park that I mentioned earlier. After 2.5 years, we almost tripled the value of the park, and we were able to return 100% of investor capital. Investors still own that park and are getting cash flow every month, but they already have all their capital back. So, these are some things in the space that we really like. And again, I think it's really similar to multifamily. You could even call it a portion of multifamily, but it has some really nice benefits that can help round out a portfolio if you're already investing in that space.
So what's the threshold for institution to come in? Like, how big of a portfolio does it need to be before institutions will come in and consider buying those? Yeah,
it varies, right? So you could have buyers that are looking at a $3 or $5 million park, but we have a larger group that we're familiar with that is interested in what we do from a financing perspective, and their minimum check size is, their preferred minimum is 10 million. Their absolute minimum is 5 million. So we could buy all 3 of the parks that we're working on right now for less than 5 million. So to put that into perspective, so 5 or 10 million, that's a fairly large park. Or you have to, like we have about 20 parks currently. That's a good size portfolio that could be sold off in its entirety, for instance.
Interesting. And so what are some of the drawbacks here? When I hear this trend of the number of mobile home parks keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller, is there a risk that you're going to get municipalities that change direction and they don't want to approve? I don't know. Is there some situation where they would want to close down parks or get rid of existing parks that you could potentially own?
So it's pretty rare that you own a park and then somebody, the city or municipality comes in and says, "Hey, you can't be a mobile home park anymore." That effectively doesn't happen if you're in compliance. I'm not saying it can't happen, but the issue is, so if you're a city and you're getting taxed, or you're taxing, basically land, right?
Yep.
That's not going to have the same tax value as if you took that land and converted it to, say, a development of homes.
Sure.
You're going to get a much higher tax base doing that. The other thing is, if you're a city and you're in the path of progress and you're like, hey, we want affordable housing, you're going to face that NIMBY, right? So you have the neighbors that are around. They're like, well, I don't want a mobile home park back there. I would rather have, more single family homes. So both from a financial perspective and from a social perspective, you're going to have pressure to not approve more mobile home parks. The other thing is, if you have a chunk of land in the path of development, potentially you could take that park and you could convert it into something that's more valuable. So that is one of the nice things about mobile home parks. You could say it's kind of like, a shopping mall or an office, maybe take an office and you convert it into apartments today, which is occurring because rents are so high and office prices are so low. Maybe it's a shopping mall that's being converted into maybe like senior housing or something to that, or self-storage. We've seen that occur as well, or like Kmart's turning into self-storage. It's very similar. You could do that. I think really the downside, Randy, comes in terms of operational risk, because we've seen and we've purchased from owners that were, say, multifamily owners that came in and said, "Oh, I'm going to buy a mobile home park. This is like, what's the difference?" It's really hard to find a third-party operator to come in and really well-run mobile home park. So our staff, a lot of times they live in a park, in one of the parks or in one of the areas, or kind of migrate around. It takes a lot of attention to take, say, a 1 or 2 star park up to a 3-star park. And that's, we don't really say ABC in like we do in multifamily. We say 4-star park, 3-star park, 2-star park, 1-star park. And we're kind of focused on that, kind of lower middle, like that 2-star park range, and getting them to a higher level and also stabilizing them. So taking, say, a 50% occupied 1-star park and converting it into a 75 or 85% occupied, nice 2-star park that is still very affordable, but you don't walk on it and you have junk laying around and rust on the homes and dilapidated stairs and old homes that haven't been removed, for instance. But you get that because if you're a small owner and if it costs you $5,000 to move a home, and you own a park outright that you bought for, say, $500,000, if it's worth $1 million or $2 million, you might not have $500,000 in the bank to make the improvements. And that's where we come in. We raise the money to buy the park and the CapEx, which is usually substantial, to really, improve it, replace homes, and do those sorts of things.
And so I know in this space, there's this park owned versus tenant owned homes. So can you talk about that and what your strategy is?
Yeah. Excellent question. And this really comes into a really large area of opportunity. So if you own a mobile home park that has less than 75% of the homes tenant owned, which means that you are renting the lots to the owners of the homes, less than 75% are in that category, it's really hard to get high quality or agency debt for those parks. So you either have to bring more money to close, or you're relying on a private lender, for instance. So now the flip side of that. So the bank wants them to be tenant-owned homes. They prefer that over park-owned. Okay, perfect. Correct. And the reason is just simply because of the operations requirements of having park-owned homes? So there's a few different things. So one, banks, institutions prefer not to own the homes because it's a lot less work if you're just renting the dirt, right? It's also more predictable.
That makes sense.
If you're a bank and you don't want to take back a depreciating asset as well if you're a bank, right? It's really hard to kind of value that. So you have to kind of put the homes into one bucket and the land into another bucket. So there's that aspect. Larger institutional operators, they're in the same boat. They really don't want to own a bunch of homes. So how do you solve that problem if you buy a park that, as I mentioned before, it's 50% occupied or 60% occupied, and you want to get it to 75 or 80% occupied? What do? This is where our strategy comes in, and where we tend to really thrive in this area, Randy. So we come in and we specialize in those 50 to 75% occupied parks because we bring the capital to bring the homes in, and we actually have a mobile home debt fund where we actually buy the home, we put the home in the park, and then we owner finance it to the new owner. And that qualifies as a tenant-owned home, which is great. I don't love owning paper on a mobile home unless I own the park, unless I own the dirt that home sits on. Because now, if you buy that home from us, Randy, and you've put a down payment down and you've moved in and now you're making the monthly payments and you stop paying, we can pick up the payment as the owner of the park, right? We own both sides of that equation. The other thing is we can turn around and we can resell the home. If we need to, we can rent the home temporarily to get cash flow. And the cash flow is pretty awesome. If you pay $10,000 for a used home, you may be getting $3,000 a year or more for that $10,000 home. That's pretty good cash on cash. So we love the cash flow. from park-owned homes, but we also love the impact on the value of the actual park that selling that home has.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we're equipped to do both if necessary. But our strategy largely is take a underutilized or underoccupied park, fill it up, get it rented, and refinance or sell it as a part of a bigger portfolio at that point.
Okay. And what kind of returns could an investor expect to get in this, maybe compared to like a C or a B class value add multifamily?
Yeah. So again, I think there's like the strategy that I just outlined has more variables, and I would say to any investor, you should expect a higher return in an investment with more variables. So we're usually seeing high single-digit cash flow from these parks. Usually from day one. We have a mobile home park fund, and it's paying 8% to investors on a quarterly basis, consistently. And then investors can expect, typically I would say high teen. I'll be conservative and say high teen returns for mobile home parks, which I think should compare pretty favorably to kind of like a heavier value add deal. But what I like about mobile home parks, Randy, is typically compared to like a heavy value add deal, we're cash flowing pretty well from day one on these parks, which you don't always get on a heavy value add deal in the multifamily space.
And so when I've dug into these, because I'm interested in this space, I've thought about bringing this into impact equity as well. These are generally longer. My understanding is these are generally longer term holds. So we go beyond that 5-year window, and as a fund manager, it gets more difficult to have funds that have longer expiration dates. So what does your typical pro forma look like, and what's the business plan or strategy around hold time?
Yeah, and I think it can depend. So we basically have 2 timelines that we operate on. So we have our buy, stabilize, refinance, hold, and sell strategy, which is going to be on the longer end, like say 5 to 7 years. I'm being conservative. Like the example I used earlier, we estimated that we would refinance at year 3. We were well ahead of schedule on that one. We actually delayed it so we can get higher loan proceeds in the current interest rate environment, but we still refinanced at 2.5 years. Those investors got about 115% of capital back thus far in the first 2.5 years. And we'll continue to hold that. We'll continue to drive occupancy and rents and up a little bit higher in that park, and ultimately sell that. Our second strategy is a little shorter. So we're buying parks that are a little higher occupancy, and that's going to be more like a 3 to 5 year timeline, which is going to be more congruent with a value add deal. So yeah, I think it kind of depends on the strategy, Randy. You can be kind of congruent with multifamily timelines. But again, if we're planning to hold a park for a longer time period, we're anticipating getting investors' capital back well before that time period. So, kind of, I would say on average, 3 to 5 years, investors should expect to get their capital with a positive return back in pretty much all of our deals.
Got it. Well, awesome, Chris. Well, thank you for walking through that. We've not had a lot of discussions around mobile home parks, but we'll likely have more and more, because it's something I'm becoming more and more interested in. Oddly enough, mobile home park was my very first passive investment that I made. Oh, wow. And had a different experience with that early on, but it's starting to turn around. So that's what's piqued my interest again. And as yield gets harder and harder to achieve in multifamily, of course, we're going to look at other asset classes. So, well, Chris, this has been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot. I feel like I could go deeper on a bunch of different areas, but we'll save that for another day, because I would still like to cover a few questions that I like to ask everybody before wrapping up, if that's all right.
Always. Let's do it.
All right. Well, I know you mentioned that you have a book, so I think we certainly want to readdress that. But from an education standpoint for a passive investor, can you think of one of the most important educational resources, either from a book or a podcast standpoint, that the newer passive investor should definitely be looking at?
Yeah, I pulled one out earlier when we were kind of talking before the show, and I would highly suggest this book. It's called The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking by Philip Anderson. It talks about the 18.6-year real estate cycle, and it's really based on credit and the price of land. And for somebody that has spent a lot of time in traditional finance and economics, I read it and I was like, wow, this really kind of makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of rhyme to it. It has kind of a crystal ball in the front of the book for those that are watching here, and if you're not watching, and you're just listening, it's got kind of a crystal ball. I wouldn't make short-term bets, on these sorts of things. But what I can tell you is it really helps determine what assets are going to do well during what parts of the cycle. You can listen to episode 100 of my podcast, nextlevelincome.com, episode 100, and I summarize the book and some of the lessons that I've learned from it.
Awesome. I will have that on when I'm at the gym later this afternoon, actually. Thank you.
There you go. Let me know what you think.
I will, definitely.
Yeah.
So we're spending a lot more time on due diligence on the podcast and really digging into this due diligence process. So are there any due diligence questions that you think need to be asked no matter what if you're a newer passive investor?
Oh man. We only have a few minutes left, and that's like a 10-minute answer. But so we actually just went through this with our coaching group last night on our call, talking about underwriting and due diligence. So first thing, I'm going to go through real quick, kind of my framework, because I mentioned I like framework. So number one, you want to determine what asset class and why you're investing, so you can kind of weed out operators that don't fit in that mold. Number two, geography. So you want to be in an area that has, we love the Southeast, that has a really strong population, growing population and economic base. You want economic diversity. Number three, you want to be in a space that is the right space at the right time of the real estate cycle. Again, high prices, high interest rates, what assets work well. We just talked about mobile home parks, affordable housing, tax abatement deals in the multifamily space tend to work well at this time as well. Operators, have they done this strategy before? How long have they been in operation? Have they had exits? What's the worst case scenario that they've experienced? We built this home and we went with a builder that we knew and had built several spec homes before. Not necessarily, I think he was in the upper tier of builders in terms of quality, but I wanted to work with somebody that I knew if something went wrong, that I could solve the problem with that person. When I was in the OR, one of the surgeons I worked with, Randy, he said, how do you get this out if something goes wrong? Because he wanted to know, hey, something's always going to go wrong. How do you take this implant out? And, there's some implants that are really hard to get out that cause a lot of real problems. So, when can you get out of a deal? How can you get out of a deal? When are you going to get your money back? What if this or this goes wrong? What is the biggest downside risk of a deal? I think those are all I love it. Very, very important.
Yeah, and that's not one that I hear a lot about. So, like, what is the worst case scenario, and how can I get out, or when do I get out? So, like, the sooner in mobile homes specifically, if you can do a cash out refi and get your capital back in 3 years and keep running returns, that is significantly more powerful than your dollars being locked up for 5 years. So, just for velocity of capital reasons alone, right? So
exactly. And if you're getting cash flow, like if compare that to a development deal that you get no cash flow for 2 or 3 years, and then 100% back plus your return, that's going to be way more risky than a deal that you're getting consistent cash flow and then chunks of your capital back.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Okay, now I have a couple of fun ones here. So I'm a big bucket list guy. We talk about bucket list a lot on this podcast. Do you have a bucket list item that you have checked off your list recently, or one you hope to in the near future?
So big one I checked off, and this picture's back here to remind me of it. I rafted the Grand Canyon with some friends, self-guided. We did 16 days. That is from one of my favorite areas in the Grand Canyon. And I saw that picture when I was on a family ski trip out in Colorado, and I said, I got to put that on the wall. It means a lot to me. But kind of smaller bucket list items. We're always trying to visit the national parks. I took my son to a lacrosse tournament, and we happened to go through St. Louis, Missouri, and I took him to the Arch National Park, the Gateway Arch there in St. Louis. So we just checked that off. We'll be checking off Cuyahoga National Park on the way back from my wife's family's reunion.
Very nice.
Here in about a month. So, but I love different adventures, Randy, and I'm always looking for different things. But those are a couple ones here from recently.
I love it. Thank you. Do you have one of those maps where you're checking off the national parks on it, or
we got a big travel map that I bought for the family for Christmas here a year ago downstairs in our family room, and we put pins on it. We have pins for the future. We have pins that we've been to, and then we have our favorite ones around the world as well that we've been to. I
love it.
And, I love travel, both foreign and domestic.
Very good. Very good. All right. And then the final question, if you had $100,000 that you had to invest today, and you couldn't put it into one of your own deals, where would you place that capital?
What do you have for me today, Randy? Let's talk about it.
That was not self-serving. No.
There you go.
Curious.
I would. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's see. My own can't do my own deal. You know what? I'm also a fan of Bitcoin. I think monetary policy is a big one in this country. But I would probably take $100,000 and I'd put $2,000 a week into Bitcoin for the next year.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard, been listening to some new podcasts that talk a lot about this. I've stayed away from it entirely up to this point. Yep. But I heard something recently where after the split, there's a window that you see beyond a certain point after that window or after the split where you start to see large gains in that space. So who knows?
I'll send you some info on that.
Okay.
I got a framework around that too. I'll share with you.
I bet. Well, very good. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it, Chris. This has been really informative. You're obviously a very impressive, very disciplined, very well-respected gentleman in the space as well. I do want to share that with the audience. I've been connected with Chris for quite some time, but very well-respected by people that I know, like, and trust. So that goes a long way. But Chris, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Randy, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for everything you do for the audience out there. The audience, thanks for listening. Again, get a free copy of our book at nextlevelincome.com. Hopefully it helps you on your journey towards financial independence.
I love it. All right. And to the audience, as always, we encourage you to continue your education journey with passive investing. But more importantly than that, we encourage you to take the first step and invest in your first passive investment. Both Chris and I are convinced that once you do, you will just wish you had started sooner. So thank you again for joining us today. And be sure to join us again next Thursday for another great episode. Thank you.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of The Gentle Art of Crushing It. It was an amazing episode. We know we sure learned a lot, and we hope you did as well. We want to take a second and thank you so much for viewing or listening to this episode. And please just know that we only ask for one favor, and that is to make this life magnificent. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.